Hi, everybody. Welcome today to the Starboard Portal. I'm Jen Gamaris from US Sailing, the Youth Education Manager. We are so excited to have you all here, and we have an amazing lineup. At this time, you're welcome to introduce yourself in the chat, maybe a name, where you're located, if you're affiliated with a sailing organization. And then throughout our session, you can put any questions you have into that chat box, and we have time at the end for a Q&A. And if we can't get to them all then, we'll be sure to write them down and get back to you after the session. But I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Elizabeth Kratzig.
Thanks, Jen. First, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to join us this Tuesday afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Kratzig, and I'm an ambassador for 11th Hour Racing. Today, our panel will discuss tools to kickstart sustainability at your sailing program. We'll basically explore different ideas and initiatives which you can include in your organization's sustainability practices. Before we dive into the panel introductions, I want to point out that all three panelists represent projects which were funded by the 11th Hour Racing Grants Program. Since 2013, 11th Hour Racing has awarded 166 grants to over 79 programs. So if you or your organization has an innovative idea to protect and restore the health of our oceans and needs a jumpstart, I encourage you to explore the 11th Hour Racing website and learn about their grant programs. So back to today's focus, the goal of the discussion this afternoon is that whatever your role in the sailing or maritime communities, that you'll come away with something, a new idea, a fresh perspective, a new strategy, something which you can incorporate into your organization's sustainability plan. So here's the format for the next hour to give you an idea what to expect. First, we'll take a few moments for each of the panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their backgrounds. Then each panelist will give you some resources to assist in building up your organization's sustainability plan. And then we'll open up the floor to give you an opportunity to ask questions. So now on to the introductions. First, we have Dan Redding, Head of Sustainability for World Sailing.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak. As Elizabeth said, I'm working at World Sailing, so the International Federation. I've been there for about 4 years as head of sustainability, and prior to that I was sustainability manager at the Royal Yachting Association, so the British equivalent to US Sailing, and I spent about 10 years there doing a number of things, but amongst some of the tasks I was doing, I traveled to about 300 different sailing clubs, sailing and yacht clubs, carrying out environmental audits. So what I'll be talking about today is about some initiatives and some resources we've put together based on those visits. So yeah, look forward to discussing that in a bit more detail.
Thank you, Dan. And just a side note, I met Dan first at the Youth World Sailing Championships, where he very stringently had us exercise many different sustainability programs in the championship. So I learned a lot from Dan in that. Next is Emily Pinn, co-founder of Expedition and creator of the Shift Method.
Hi, everyone. Really lovely to be joining you today. Like Dan, I'm also from the UK. You can probably tell by our accents. I actually grew up sailing toppers and 29ers over here in Britain, and then had a chance to take a boat across the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. And that's when I first saw this issue of plastic pollution hundreds of miles from land, and have spent the last 10 years really trying to understand more about the huge challenges that our ocean face. So mostly at sea, doing research, trying to find out the real problem with plastic pollution, and then most importantly, what our options are for solving the issue. And that's really what I'm going to be talking about here today.
Thank you, Emily. So finally, we have Jen Gamaris, who's the Youth Education Manager for US Sailing.
Thanks, Elizabeth. As Elizabeth mentioned, I work at US Sailing, and before that, I have run nonprofit community sailing centers and worked in a variety of field-based science education organizations, from elementary school age students to graduate programs in field marine science. And I'm really excited to be here today to just represent US Sailing, some of the resources that have been created in the last couple of years, and then specifically our STEM education initiative called the REACH program, which started in 2012 and has come leaps and bounds in just about the last 10 years. So I'll be sharing some of those resources, and just really grateful to have this amazing group of panelists with us that have also contributed to a lot of the resources US Sailing has been sharing. So thanks for having me.
Okay, thank you, Jen. We're going to start off with Dan, and I think we're going to begin screen sharing his little presentation that he's going to go through. And again, thank you again for joining us this afternoon, and a big thank you to all the panelists for being here. Okay.
Great, thank you very much. So yeah, my presentation today, as I mentioned, is drawing on the experience of visiting all those sailing and yacht clubs, and really finding out about some of the common issues and putting together some resources to help you if you're managing a club or a centre or something in between to basically try and minimise your environmental footprint. So if we could go to the next slide, please. One of the things that I guess we identified was that there was no real sustainability resources specifically for clubs around this. I know there's some great resources that US Sailing have put together with the REACH program. We kind of thought that maybe there was something that we could put together, which I'll go into in a bit more detail. So we have the self-assessment tool, which I'll talk about. We have our education program, which is aimed at 6 to 12-year-olds, which we put together with the Ocean Race. And that's in lots of different languages. We also have guides with case studies of yacht clubs, one of which is the Corpus Christi Yacht Club and the event that we ran in 2018 that Elizabeth mentioned. Also, we have an energy checklist, and one of the key, I guess, rationale for when people would invite me to clubs was a concern about something, if it would be kind of water bills, energy bills, so looking to reduce expenditure and reinvest that within the club, as well as looking at some other operational areas. So we have a number of different resources. You can see a few of them on the screen here. And if we can go to the next slide, please. But today I'm going to talk about this self-assessment tool. So when I was visiting clubs, you have the resource, i.e. me kind of going through or walking around the club and going through essentially an audit checklist. But we started to think, if we want to offer this internationally, we need to be able to do it digitally. So we worked with a few different partners and produced this self-assessment tool. So first of all, it's free. Secondly, it's online. So you can access it from your phone, laptop, or a tablet. And what it is a list of about 150 different questions, whereby the answers will give you a tailored action plan. So depending on, you can leave them blank if you don't know the answer to the questions, but it will go through a set of all the different areas within the club. It could be slipway maintenance, anti-fouling, if you have it, you might not, refueling, and a few other areas. And you also get a score. So depending on the answers that you give, you get a score, which we hope that people will benchmark. We've already had we've had clubs from 14 different countries use the tool. So we're building up more and more case studies. And if we can go to the next slide, please. Give you a bit more detail. So first and foremost, it's confidential. So nobody's going to, none of the data is going to be shared. What we're also doing is looking at the trends. So looking at the back end of the system, if we have 80% of clubs are worried about waste management, then we will put extra resource in terms of case studies. And I think that's valuable in terms of not wanting to have salespeople giving you a pitch, but looking at other clubs, what they've done, how successful it's been, if there are any kind of pearls of wisdom, if there are any costs, any cost savings. So we've already started to capture case studies from clubs from around the world and also in the US. So the tool will evolve. Already it's been in existence now for around 6 months. And yeah, as I mentioned, we have about 142 questions that cover all aspects of the club and its operations. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So here you can see this is the actual tool as it looks, and if you could start the video, please. Yeah, there it is. So I'll just talk through effectively. This is what it looks like, and as I mentioned, you can access this on phone, laptop, etc. These are some of the easy questions, I suppose, to start off with. And as you go through it, a lot of the questions are kind of yes, no. So here, is there an appointed sustainability officer? Is there an environmental policy? And if you answer no to those questions, it will give you advice. First of all, it will give you a score, but it will give you advice on how to create a sustainability policy. What kind of targets should you have, and answers to all of the different questions based on your response. And I think it's probably true to say that from the different visits that I've made, that you may not know all of the answers straight away, and often is the case that it could be that your treasurer knows the details of your energy contracts or what kind of waste management you have. But this, as you see at the end, this is the effectively there's a score that you get. So this is a pretty poorly scoring example, and then you download the PDF and you get that to keep and take back to the club, and there you've got essentially your action plan. So if we could go to the next slide, please. And these are the different sections. So as you can see, that pretty much covers most of the, well, all of the topics that we think are relevant. So we've got everything from your biosecurity, so invasive species, to waste and single-use plastic that Emily's going to talk about, and some of these other topics. And I think what I found is that there's always going to be something that it's good to have a second set of eyes to just basically give yourself some peace of mind that you're doing it properly, or you might be able to learn from others where they've made an improvement that it could make a cost saving, or something that you could do at your sailing centre. So if we could go to the next slide, please. And just to support this, we also have this guide as well. So again, this is accessible to everybody, and within this we have additional case studies, and this has been specifically tailored for sailing and yacht clubs. But I think there's still a lot of stuff in there that's relevant to sailing centres as well. If we could go to the next slide, please. And as I'd mentioned, this is what you would get. This would be emailed to you, and you can go back and change some of the answers to change your score over time, but it gives you a benchmark. So here, as we see, only 23%, so certainly room for improvement. If we go to the next slide, please. And the case studies, I think, are quite important to find out about what else is going on internationally, but as I mentioned, these will be evolving. So we're already starting a new round of case studies from other clubs and trying to make it more relevant. So I'll be looking forward to seeing more case studies from the US, hopefully. And I think as well, when we have different technologies or different approaches to some of these issues, there's going to be more case studies that appear that will be helpful. If we go to the next slide, please. So these are the common areas that I found need addressing when I've been carrying out audits. So when you have designated areas, so if it's a protected site, and actually a lot of marine environments are designated, well, protected internationally. So first of all, finding out where they are, and if you're carrying out high risk activities, so I would deem that where you could have pollution incidents, so things like refueling your ribs or other activities similar to that, or if you have chemicals storage on site. So these, I think, are the main areas that I found that sometimes it's legal breaches. So do you know what the legal obligations are? If not, how do you go about doing that, and how do you make sure you're on the right side of the law? And that's kind of minimum requirements. If we go to the next slide, please. And here, I guess, just a typical or an ideal club, or for a dinghy club anyway. And it just shows some of the different areas that are covered. So, you know, everything from oil storage to energy use, washing down of boats, and everything in between. Go to the next slide, please. So for me, I think what once you have the action plan, prioritizing is obviously important, but to focus on the most significant impacts. So typically that would be legal compliance. So if you find out that there's something that you need to change in terms of your approach to be compliant with the law, that's something to start off with. And you'd be amazed, clubs internationally, how many sort of infringements that there can be, because environmental law is always changing, so it's important to stay on top of that. Also then looking at your scope, so you know what you can control, and then also about costs. So it could be some things might need capital expenditure to start things off, or it could be that there's cost savings to be made. So this is just a kind of a general image just to show where to start. So if you go to the next slide, please. And if there's one thing that you take away from this presentation, it's to measure, measure, measure. So we've got a few examples here. So in the UK, Parkstone Yacht Club, they had essentially, they were billed quarterly for their water use, and they hadn't realized that there was a leak until they started measuring. So that saved them about US $15,000. On the left-hand side, there was another club that until we went in and did an audit to look at their energy use, they had 3 energy meters, or so they told me, and they'd been paying those for the last 7 to 8 years. But what they hadn't realized is that there were 2 sub-meters, so they'd been paying for their electricity 3 times. So without measuring, you can't manage. And what that club were able to do was to get a rebate of, so US, it was $350,000. So that's certainly a nice bit of, if you relate that to membership fees, that certainly was pretty good, so they can reinvest that in the club. So that's it from me. Hopefully there's a few points that are of interest, and I'm sure we'll be happy to take questions at the end. Here's some of the ways that you can follow World Sailing, but I will hand over to Elizabeth or Emily. Emily.
Wow, Dan. Thank you so much for that. That's really valuable. I think the measuring is super easy to do too. I remember when you were encouraging us to do that in Corpus, and I thought it was going to be a big, difficult task, and it was quite easy. So that's a really easy way to have clubs manage everything. So on to Emily and some things that individuals can do as well.
Great, thank you so much. And yeah, Dan, that was fascinating to see it all explained in that way. And I hope lots of organisations can take that measuring on. So yeah, speaking of measuring, really that's what we've been trying to get a handle on over this last decade of research at sea on the plastics issue. And I think for me that the biggest surprise of going on a research expedition to these accumulation zones in the middle of our oceans is that actually we didn't find these huge islands of plastic, something that we could quite easily clean up and pile on a boat and take back to land and deal with it. Instead, what we typically found, like this picture shows here, is more of a plastic soup. And what we now know is that this soup of maybe 5 trillion fragments is covering the surface of our ocean. We now start to realize that it's getting into the food chain, it's getting into our bodies, along with the chemicals that are used in the production of that plastic. And we also know that it's sinking down to the depths in places so deep we can't even, as scientists, measure what's going on, and as problem solvers, work out how to then clean it up. So the more and more that I've looked at this issue, the more I've started to realize that actually the solutions are different than we originally thought. So if we go on to the next slide, I think this is probably my biggest takeaway statement of there's no silver bullet solution to tackle this plastics issue, because the sources of pollution, they are endless. When we're out there, we will find everything from fishing waste to bottle tops and cigarette lighters, tire dust, little microfibres that have come from our clothing when we put them in the washing machine. But what this means is that there's not then one answer, there's not one way to solve it, but we need to tackle all of these different sources. So that's the big takeaway message. And really the way to tackle this, as I've mentioned on the next slide here, is at the source. It's about turning off this tap, because by the time that plastic gets into the ocean, it's so hard to then go out. And you as sailors and people who are used to life on the water know that better than anyone. It's really hard when you're out there with waves and dealing with a vessel to try and clean up. It's much easier on land. And so we go on to realise that there are these hundreds of solutions, and it's actually quite easy to feel completely overwhelmed. When there's hundreds of options, you think, well, where on earth do I start? I can't do all of these things. I've got to get my kids to school. I've got to go to work. You know, I can't kind of do it all. So this is exactly why we built this Shift platform to try and overcome this problem of not knowing kind of where to start. And ultimately, as I've shown in the next slide, try and really drive solutions closer to the source, because we've all probably taken part in a beach cleanup, picked up litter wherever we've seen it, which we need to continue doing. But ultimately, we need to get the solutions further in these top two chambers here, looking at ways that we can close the loop. And by that, I mean not creating waste in the first place. How do we use products and have systems in our society that mean we're just not using this process, a linear process where we take something, we use it, and then we throw it away? Or better still, right at the top here of the spectrum is looking for ways to completely avoid using plastic in the first place. But at the moment, a lot of the solutions that do exist typically are down in the bottom kind of two chambers here. There's lots of what we often call recycling going on. So you put your plastic bottle in a recycling bin, you think, great, I've done my bit. Turns out actually only 9% of the plastic that we all use actually gets recycled. And even when it does, it often gets turned into something of less value than the thing that it was before, or at least the material value gets kind of less and less, and eventually it will still end up in landfill, or hopefully not the ocean, but sometimes it does. And so we've got to kind of be wary of some of those solutions that make us feel like we're doing the right thing when we're still in a linear process. Hence, we tend to call that downcycling rather than recycling. And the idea is, how do we get into those top two chambers where there's less obvious solutions lie? So moving on, I want to introduce the Shift platform. Now, this is a partnership with technology company SAP, who helped us build this piece of tech to help people navigate solutions. And it's designed for smartphone, but it is a website. You can find it at www.shift.how, so on your laptop or your iPad or your smartphone. And start exploring, really, and try and look at some of the ways that you can then find points that you can get going. So I'll show you a little bit more with how the filters work in the next slide. There's really three main things for you to think about, because rather than having these 200 solutions all in one go, the idea is to use these filters that you can access in the top right hand corner to help weed out the solutions that are going to be the best place to start. So first, there'll be a question about how do you want to make your shift, make that change? Where are you on the journey? Are you at the stage where you just want to learn more about what's going on? Or are you sort of right near the end of the journey where you're ready to lead your community, your sailing program, something on the ground to actually take things really to a new level? And there's also many of other things in between. Is it a swap that we're looking to make to change something that we can see in our organization at the moment that's made out of plastic? I mean, there's a swap for almost everything now. So there's a great filter there to look at those. Is it about participating in something bigger, finding tools to communicate to others in the community around you, or are you ready to innovate and create something new? So pick the place that you want to start, move on to the next filter. What is it that you're trying to change? Oh, sorry, I meant the next filter in that last slide, if we were able to pop back. Perfect. So these are all of the different kind of places that you'll probably find plastic. And, you know, for a sailing organization, there will be plenty there in the food, the community, and the work sort of sections. And then finally, the last filter here is where on that sea to soil spectrum that I described earlier. So if we now go and have a look at the video on the next slide, this will just give you a little walkthrough of what to kind of expect when you're tapping those filters and letting it take you to sort of show you the answers. And literally the range of different ways that we can tackle this problem, you know, I really feel they're so endless. And I think, you know, for sailing organizations and programs, you can start maybe looking in the canteen if you have a place with a site, and think about plastic cups and cutlery and straws and containers that food's being served in. That's probably a really easy place to start to realize that you can eliminate plastic. You can then start looking at things like, you know, what's in the showers that kids are maybe using after sailing. Can you switch to shampoo that's a bar rather than a plastic soap bottle? Think about the types of chemicals that are in those soaps, because probably they're going to be going straight into a waterway very close to the ocean. There's all sorts of other things too in terms of education, whether it's running a program within your organization. There's some great resources on here, maybe hosting a film to get people really excited and engaged. And then sailing specifically, there's some great solutions on here around neoprene that now you can get great plant-based rubber options. You can turn your old wetsuits into yoga mats. You can get rope from Marlow that's made now of all sorts of recycled plastic. Maybe you could set up a Saturday swap of kit that your kids have grown out of and get them into the younger kids. You know, really thinking about how do we repair things? How do we pass things on? And, you know, a lot of these solutions aren't groundbreaking, but when we add them all up together and we take what I like to call lots of micro actions, it all adds up. And if all of us around the world are taking these micro actions, that is eventually going to solve the problem. Because when I'm out there in the middle of the ocean, it really is micro actions that I'm seeing that have caused the problem. It's one bottle top, it's one cigarette lighter, it's one action that's got that plastic out there, and all it needs is one action to undo it. So please do go check it out, join the shift, and there's really so many things that you can do. Please just don't feel overwhelmed and get started. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. I've really enjoyed looking through the Shift platform in the last couple months after it was introduced to me, and some of the solutions that you have on there are really incredible. Everything from recycled eyewear to you know, like you said, recycling the wetsuits, and I think mushrooms, you can use mushroom things instead of plastics. So there's just some really innovative solutions, and I've certainly enjoyed trying to incorporate some of those into my daily routines. And next we have Jen.
Wow, that was exciting. A lot of cool new technology out there to support us in minimizing our environmental footprint as individuals and as organizations. So speaking of kind of those educational resources out there, US Sailing has a STEM education initiative called the REACH program. And the REACH program, the mission right down there, you can see the initiative is to engage youth and enhance career opportunities in the fields of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, while fostering environmental stewardship through hands-on learning experiences. This program started in 2012 and then grew and has been out there for sailing organizations, after-school programs, yacht clubs to use in a variety of different ways, whether it's in a summer camp on a rainy day or to engage local school programs and after-school youth service providers to get youth out on the water, specifically those that are under-resourced and experiencing sailing while learning the STEM components behind it. The REACH Hub model grew out of the REACH program, and it was a way to kind of increase our impact nationwide. So the REACH Hub model you'll see on this map of the United States, the kind of darker circles are REACH hubs, and these are areas that got together for 3 consecutive years and underwent professional development, third-party assessment for program quality, and sharing best practices and resources. We have 17 curriculum modules in the REACH curriculum, and the second module book, which is modules 11 through 17, came out of our Northeast and Mid-Atlantic REACH hubs, which is really exciting. Southern California over there on the West Coast is our most recent hub that just completed its 3-year funding cycle. And they've learned a lot in this and shared a number of resources from instructional design to the curriculum that they have started to generate that's specific to the Southern California coastline. So it's pretty neat to see how you can have a far-reaching impact when you work with neighboring programs across the country and adapt and manipulate curriculum that's out there to suit your geographic location. Things that happened in our REACH hubs, which we try to mirror in some of our work at our national conferences, at which Emily's presented at and Elizabeth's presented at, and is just how can we provide more of that professional development to our organization so it can trickle down in terms of the educational resources for the youth that are joining sailing programs. Through mentor sessions, meeting twice a year, sharing successes and challenges, exchanging program ideas, and that professional development really allows for people to continue to improve their instructional design and implementation, but also improve their curriculum. So working together, I think, speaks to all 3 of our panelists today. It's the way we can have the largest impact, whether it's sharing resources with neighboring sailing programs or joining together as an organization to complete a self-assessment. The REACH curriculum is one way that you can continue to kind of build within your community and have a further reaching impact on the local youth by educating them authentic learning experiences to change behavior. In 2019, we had 45 program professionals join us in this REACH Hub model from 28 different sailing organizations. And that's just a small snapshot of the overall organizations using the REACH curriculum nationwide. So what are the benefits of STEM programming? If you're a sailing organization, you're thinking, we just, we want to teach sailing, or we have a really great racing program, or maybe, our sailing instructors, they're not scientists. Well, that's okay. STEM education can start at a very basic level. And if you look at the sport of sailing and the aquatic environment, it's rich with all different components that pertain to those different sciences and technology and engineering and mathematics. So you don't have to be a scientist to implement this at your organization, nor do kids have to think that, man, I want to enroll in an engineering class this summer. Just getting out on the water and experiencing sailing can be such an exciting way for them to start to dabble in the STEM fields and maybe pursue STEM careers and perhaps be the next designer of a new, maybe not the Shift platform, but something else technology-wide, or build off of Emily and Dan's resources down the road as part of a college thesis. But it's really neat. It can, again, create some community impact if you use the REACH curriculum. It expands accessibility to sailing for under-resourced, underserved youth in urban communities, specifically near water bodies. And then it allows for your staff to develop as well. So again, your staff don't need to be scientists or have a STEM or engineering background. They really just need to enjoy sailing and working with youth and have an open mind, because everything's already there in just experiencing and teaching sailing. Another benefit of kind of STEM programming is it is a revenue opportunity. So Dan was speaking to some of the ways and savings that you can have when you pay more attention to some of the sustainable aspects that you can adjust at your organization. There are funding opportunities out there for organizations that are using STEM education and specifically for under-resourced youth. So it's a great way that you can expand your program offerings and also potentially add some more revenue streams to your sailing organization. So what does authentic learning experiences mean? What does hands-on mean? We talk about this a lot in the science education field. And it's this part about kind of getting into the material. It's inquiry-based teaching, which means you're learning and exploring and experiencing as you're going versus answering yes/no questions and true/false questions or following a lab report, steps 1 to 7. It's really about building your experience along the way while gaining the skills to approach, complex problems. So it's not about knowing the 7 steps to the water quality testing. It's more about understanding an aquatic environment and what to look for to identify its water quality. The exciting part too about the REACH curriculum is that it's aligned to the next generation science standards. So you see those kind of 3 boxes on the right side of the screen. Those are the 3 dimensions of next generation science standards, and kind of, I think, set the stage for what authentic learning, inquiry-based learning, and place-based education can look like. So things like the science and engineering practices that are prevalent in the REACH curriculum around developing and using models, planning and carrying out investigations, and using data and computational thinking, to the actual subject matter, those disciplinary core ideas. Motion and stability, I think we can all say that that's something that experienced sailors go through and trying to figure out in terms of being effective sailors. Waves and their applications and technologies for information transfer, ecosystems and interactions. As a sailor, we have to know a lot about how our water and our wind and our weather can impact where and when we want to sail, whether we're competing in a regatta or on an expedition like Emily has been. Knowing all those pieces are crucial to get from point A to point B. And then those cross-cutting concepts is, what do you see connected across all these areas, from the cause and effects relationships, the patterns. By looking at patterns, we're able to figure out solutions, which I think is a big part of today's conversation. So it's kind of fun if you dig a little bit deeper into how maybe something a little bit more on the simple platform for youth education can lead to some really exciting ideas down the road. So how does this manifest in terms of overall student impact if you are working with educational organizations and community sailing centers across the country? Is that you have students improving their life skills, learning to apply things that they're doing in school or at the sailing center to real life situations. You have students interested in STEM careers. We need that. It's one of the largest growing fields of employment. Not only are we supporting youth in finding employment, but we're also just exposing them to topics that can typically be intimidating. Additionally, science education, experiential education builds to people having an increased interest in environmental stewardship. So I think all of these pieces we're talking about today really can connect to environmental stewardship. And at a young age, talking about these pieces, giving them opportunities to explore and ask questions is really going to help equip our youth to better prepare and support our environmental stewardship moving forward. You can find a lot of these resources for the STEM curriculum on the US Sailing website. It's available in the store. You'll see the module 11 through 17 guide, which again came out of our hub program, and then a student logbook and portfolio, which includes some worksheets. So just different ways that you can use that curriculum in working with young people at your organization. And then there's a number of videos on the website that kind of show this in action. So if you're curious to learn more or see if it's something that might be useful for your sailing organization and fits in, you can check those out there. But I just wanted to give folks a snapshot. US Sailing has been working on this for a while, and we've gotten a lot of positive feedback from sailing centers across the country, and we're always excited to continue to develop it as things are constantly evolving in these fields. And that's about it for me. I think we're ready for our Q&A.
Thank you, Jen. US Sailing really has an abundance of resources on their website, and I would encourage you to look through them all, because some of the material there, you have to dig through a little bit of the website, but it's just unbelievable and it's very, very helpful. So now we're going to take some time for questions and answers to our panelists. So I'm hoping that we'll get some great questions from the audience today. We have a couple already posted, I see. And just to kind of start out, I think I would ask you guys to brainstorm on some of the questions that I have up on this slide. Just, after you have listened to all three panelists and kind of go through, does your organization have a sustainability program? Are you measuring your progress? What challenges do you face? What's the business value you see from it? Do you have any partners? So this participant brainstorm slide will hopefully just lead you to do some more self-assessment of your own club and organization. So for today's questions, moving on, we have one question from Patrick McBrarty, who is a question, I guess, for Emily Pinn to answer. And he said, isn't fishing industry waste a huge percentage of what you're finding in the ocean?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great question. And maybe you've been watching Seaspiricy, because this has been a really big topic in the last couple of weeks, because that film on Netflix, if you haven't seen it, it really talks about the fishing industry, how it's responsible for all sorts of things in the ocean, including being a big contributor to plastic pollution. And it's right in that it absolutely is one of the things that we find out there a lot. We'll come across these huge giant net balls where all of these bits of net have kind of wrapped up all sorts of other bits of plastic as well. And certainly, anyone who's done a beach cleanup on a windward shore, you will also see a lot of things that look like they've most likely come from the fishing industry. And it's really careful, though, that we need to be really careful that we look at the data in a sort of proportioned way, though, because there is data that says that about half of what's found in the North Pacific Gyre is fishing waste. And that's true for the very floaty things that go out to the very remote parts of the Gyre, because fishing waste is floaty and tough because it's designed for the ocean. Whereas a lot of the single-use plastic stuff that we use in our daily lives, this packaging in particular, is made of very supple plastic, and often plastic that's actually quite dense and sinks when it gets into the ocean. So when we actually start looking at sediment samples, it's a really different story as to the statistics. So fishing waste is a problem, but maybe not quite the same as the big stats show. We've got to make sure we're kind of looking at science everywhere and understanding the full water column, because our ocean is three-dimensional, and there's a lot going on under the surface that we need to find out more about as well. Some of the big picture sort of United Nations statistics have always put it at about 80% of the plastic in our ocean is from land-based sources, and about 20% is coming from activities already happening on the ocean, like fishing and shipping. So certainly a big proportion, given that we all live on land and there's not many people out there living at sea. We really need to work on all the angles to solve the problem.
Wow, that was excellent information. Just a quick question of mine, do you actually measure the sediments down in the ocean floor too, Emily, in your expeditions, or is there a way to do that?
Yeah, so we do it only in the very coastal areas where we can reach, because of course, by the time you get out to these accumulation zones, the ocean is 5-10 miles deep. It's so deep out there that very few people have been down at all. We are getting, some very deep sea samples at the moment, not from my research, but other scientists are getting deep sea samples where they are finding plastic down at these great depths. The truth is, we don't know much about the deep sea, anything about it, what lives down there, what impact this plastic might be having, how much is there. But certainly in all our sediment samples that we collect in coastal regions, we do find a huge amount of plastic in those samples.
Jill, no such from US Sailing has a question also for Emily, which is, what is your favorite shift solution and why? It's a difficult question, I think.
It's very tricky. There's so many. So I often like the really kind of lateral thinking novel ones. I've done a lot of research recently on microfibres because we find a huge amount of them, particularly in our mid-water column samples. So we drop something called a Niskin bottle, which is a very clever bottle that snaps shut at a certain depth. And it means we can then get a snapshot of water. And all those samples come up with huge amounts of fibres, polyester, polyamide, all the sorts of things that our clothes are made of. So then looking at, okay, well, how do we solve this problem? Because of course, every time we put our clothes in the washing machine, unknowingly and without meaning to, we're usually getting plastic fibres then going into the ocean. So you'll find on the Shift platform, there's quite a few solutions, whether it's putting a filter on your washing machine or something amazing called a Corable, which is like a ball of almost like Velcro that you go and put in your washing machine, or a guppy bag where you put all your clothes in a bag to stop the fibers coming out. But the one I love is there's one on there that's about having clothes that grow with your kids. It's just thinking so laterally. It's like a concertina clothing that starts small and then as you grow, it sort of unfolds. And it just means, you know, you're basically creating so much less clothing waste, which of course kids growing up always do because they grow out of their stuff quicker than it wears out. And so you can get one piece of clothing that lasts from 9 months to 4 years. And what I love about it though is that it's just solving the problem in a really different way. And I love sometimes trying to take a part of this plastic story and rather than saying, how do I just swap a polyester t-shirt for something else? It's completely flipping it on its head and it's rethinking the way we clothe our children, which I think is really interesting in the same way that when we came up with the idea for a solid shampoo, we weren't just looking at how do we package shampoo, liquid shampoo without plastic. We actually asked the question, well, how do I wash my hair without plastic? And you come up with a completely different product. So all the solutions like that are just really clever, I love. And they're going to take new behaviors to actually rethink so much about what we do in our daily lives that we just got used to doing. And it really challenges us to think there are different ways of doing things, so we can still wash and we can still be clothed without producing all this waste. So go and explore it for those wacky solutions too.
Thank you. We have a question that came in for Dan. What is the biggest area for improvement that you're finding from the assessment tool? In terms of what's the biggest area that all the clubs and organizations are needing to improve upon?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, there's probably a few areas actually, and Emily alluded to one of them earlier, which was about where you have drainage in your sailing centre, club, or whatever it might be. And something that I think is an issue that a lot of people struggle with is that maybe a club was built 50 years ago, maybe before that, and the people that actually know where the drains go maybe not around anymore, or so I think there's a common misconception that if you see a drain, it leads to the foul sewer. It's going to be treated. So there's a lot, you find a lot of the time that people would never dream of pouring some chemical or oily bilge water or whatever it might be straight into the water, as in into the sea, but they'll pour it into a drain assuming it's going to go off and be treated, but actually more often than not it's a surface water drain and it just goes straight to the marina basin or wherever you might be. So that's something I think is we've seen a lot of people ask about. And then also I guess things like chemical use for slipways, not knowing what kind of chemicals should go in the water, and the answer is there shouldn't be any chemicals going in the water, so try and use mechanical methods. And then also I suppose things like anti-fouling is a common one for clubs or places with bigger boats, about how that's captured and making sure anti-foul doesn't go in. So there's a few things in answer to the question.
I know that many of the plastic, not the plastic, excuse me, the drains into the ocean we've labeled, and you see labeled often in cities, which is certainly a good reminder that it goes directly into the oceans. So probably need to be more of those though.
Yeah, and that's the solution. That's the solution. So it's basically having something, and then people can see, if that's only rain down the drain or whatever the marker might be, and then people are made aware, and it's sort of relatively easy to address once you've found your drainage plan.
Definitely. This is a question for Jen. And what is an example of one of the clubs you feel like has been most successful in implementing REACH programs and STEM programs into their curriculum, and what are some of the success stories that you've had, and what's made those programs successful?
Well, so at this point, I think I'll extend our session another hour so we can talk about all of them. There's so many, Elizabeth. That's a great question. I will mention a couple, but that doesn't diminish the other organizations in the country for sure. I will reflect first on the Mission Bay Aquatic Center in San Diego, California. They are the center of excellence for our Southern California REACH Hub, and they were our most recent REACH Hub. And they're led by some great folks, Kevin Waldick, Kevin Straw, and Paul Lang, and then Scott Grant, who used to be there and has since moved on, but they have created an amazing community of staff. They have a couple hundred staff annually and serve some of the largest youth numbers I've ever seen. Now it's San Diego, so they can operate program year round, which is a little different than other parts of the country. But they took their learning from using the STEM curriculum and really worked with their staff team on implementation. So I think we often think about the content, and at the end of the day, it really comes back to the teaching and the instruction, and really, leaving from that teacher-centered learning to the student-centered learning, and figuring out different ways how we can support our staff in asking the right questions so that youth are able to explore and experiment and engineer and make mistakes. For goodness sakes, just make mistakes as they're experiencing science content. And I think Mission Bay has done a really nice job being creative with their staff and their staff training. They put a lot of their staff through the STEM educator course that's available now online. And they also have some very creative staff that have written new lesson modules that are applicable to their location. So I think that's the other part, is that, REACH isn't a catch-all. It's just a baseline that connects to sailing topics, but can hopefully ignite the interest of organizations to develop geographically specific lesson plans. If you're in the Great Lakes region, or if you're in coastal San Diego or in the mid-Atlantic, you might have different topics that could speak to your water quality or speak to some of your weather patterns and currents that would be different than another location, and how can you adapt for that? So Mission Bay is one. I just said the mid-Atlantic, so I'll mention the Downtown Sailing Center in Baltimore, Maryland. And they too have done a big shift in how they run their staff training as a result of using the STEM program. So it's interesting you say, like, who's having a lot of successes with their youth, and both programs have a lot of success in engaging their community members and creating new partnerships to get youth out on the water and in positive educational experiences, but they're also really working hard to have it trickle up to their staff members and create some future stories even at an older age. And then lastly, the Community Voting Center in Providence headed up by John O'Flaherty, who's our national faculty chair member for the REACH program, and kind of got this ball rolling with Jessica Service at US Sailing, has been a kind of creative mind behind just this national vision and working with outside assessors to support the programs. But just been really impressed with all the programs that do curriculum. Just last year, we had our youth engagement grant recipients, some folks out in Milwaukee and Green Bay, just having a great time and sharing some beautiful pictures of getting their program started. So we've got programs that have been doing this for 20 years before REACH even existed, and we have programs just starting even in the year of COVID last year. So it's a pretty, there's some great work being done.
Excellent. So just from a practical point of view, if I have a sailing organization, I'm interested in starting a STEM program, am I able to contact you for some guidance, or is it better to just go online and look at the resources as well? Or is there somebody to talk to?
All of the above. You can give me a phone call. Email is probably better so we can set up a time that works since I'm based in California. We have a number of resources on the REACH website, again, created by staff, volunteers. And then we also have our REACH grants for 2021. This is exciting. Those will be posted on the US Sailing website, hopefully by the end of next week. Don't hold me to it though, but I'm pretty sure it'll get up there. So it's funding for programs looking to start some REACH curriculum and program implementation at their organization. So stay tuned for that. You can check the website, but at the very least, sending me an email is the best way to do it. And I'd be happy to help.
Awesome. Thank you. Quick question for Dan, just from a practical viewpoint. If I start the online assessment tool for the club, is there a way that I can stop and start it again if I don't have all the answers to the questions? Or is there a way to look at the questions before you actually go online so you can make sure you have all the correct information?
So the system, you can start and stop. So it'll remember your IP address. So you can go back and edit. So you can take as long as you want. And I can see, some people take a couple of weeks to do it, and that's absolutely fine. If you want a list of questions, then you can contact me and I can send those in advance so it's easier. So there's a number of ways of doing that.
Okay. Excellent. I just remember that when I was looking through it, there were some questions that might require comments from different people at the club, whether it's the club manager, the facilities manager, or to get the right answers. So, well, I think we've got time for maybe one more question. I don't know if there's any more out there, but do any of you have questions for each other before I kind of wrap it up?
I have a quick one. I'd be curious just to hear from Dan and Emily, and you too, Elizabeth, is what inspires you to do the work that you do in this field of sustainability and environmental stewardship?
I guess I'll start. I basically become interested a little bit in plastic pollution first when I went to the island of Eleuthera in the Bahamas, and I was on the southern part of the island where there really was nobody living there. There was nothing there, and the beaches had plastic everywhere. And in my mind, I had always thought that the plastic pollution came from people on the beaches not throwing their trash in garbage cans, and I really failed to think about, all the plastic that was washing up in the oceans. That, and also snorkeling in that same bay and seeing all the little fibers from mainly from fishing lines, and I'm probably from clothing that Emily was talking about earlier. And it really hit me. This was probably 20 years ago. And I was just amazed and shocked that this could happen where there weren't really any people. And that led me to start thinking more about, the impact that we all have on our environment, what we could do to change. I became more interested in it when I was on the green team for the Youth Sailing World Championships in Corpus Christi. And I had said earlier that I learned a tremendous amount from Dan during that process about all sorts of ways that we could be make the event more sustainable and more educational to the attendees, and really collect a lot of data that was useful. So I think that was sort of my big learning curve and my jump to say, wow, this is like, I can make a difference. I can help. Sure, I can recycle what I'm doing, but I can do something else bigger. And the success of that, and I think in the success of the continued success in Corpus Christi in general of, following through on many of the initiatives has kept me going, because that's always fun. In fact, this year they're holding another Worlds, which they're also doing many of the same things that they did at the Youth World Championships, and it's being taken over by some new people, and it's great to see more and more people get involved in that experience. So that's my answer.
I'll jump in next. For me, I think initially it was having grown up sailing, loving the ocean, and having that feeling of the natural world and something that I really, really want to protect. That then when I saw all this plastic pollution, it really motivated me to want to do something about it. But I think as the years have gone by, what really inspires me now is actually all the other people in this field who are trying to do something, and the number of people that reach out every day saying, I get it. I care, I want to do something, and they're putting their hands up to say, I want to be part of this. I want to be part of the solution. And that is just enough to make me get out of bed every day to help drive this change and really see the solutions that we need to see come to life.
And I'll just follow up on that. I think very similar to Elizabeth and Emily, I think there's a huge amount of, certainly within the sailing community, lots of people who are super passionate. There's lots of solutions, and I think as well, I guess started when I was younger. I was asked this the other day. I think the more time you spend outdoors and on the water, you kind of want to protect that playground, and certainly, you know, you've got things that you can see. And then for me, it's looking at the more strategic pieces, and also one of the points I wanted to quickly add was that we did a survey for the Youth Worlds in Corpus Christi, and we had something like, I think it was 93% of participants said that the focus on sustainability and ocean conservation enhanced the event. So that's well, credit to Elizabeth and the team for implementing it, but the younger generation, absolutely, it's something they're super passionate about, and it's great to see that come through.
So just one last point I wanted to make, since we're kind of having a slightly open session here right now, is citizen science projects. I think that they tag along a lot with what with all three of these things. I mean, we've explored from Dan Redding what organizations can do in order to be more sustainable, more conscientious of their footprint. We've just explored with Emily Pinn some solutions that individuals can take and sort of start and build through and try to implement one thing at a time, and then build on what they're contributing to their sustainability actions for individuals. And then we've talked to Jen about the importance of reach and the STEM activities for the youth, and really educating the youth and having great instructors that lead those youth to learn more about the environment. And so we've kind of looked at 3 different areas here. And then just one fourth area that I wanted to mention, which tags in a little bit with all 3 of these, is just the citizen science projects. That there are a number of citizen science projects that you can get involved with, that it can be a part of your sailing organization, or maybe they're mentioned on Emily's platform, or maybe they're even a part of something that a yacht club participates in. And that's a great way to get people involved in feeling like they are part of this movement. Sometimes I think that when you're just doing your one thing, it's hard to sometimes get as motivated as Emily is every day. But if you're part of a greater movement, sometimes it's a little bit easier. And there's a citizen science project that I'm involved with called the Nurdle Patrol, where you pick up nurdles that you find, particularly usually in the Gulf of Mexico. That's the raw material that makes plastics. There are numerous other citizen science projects, whether it's testing the quality of the water in your area and maintaining data on that, to creating cleanups and trash bins in your area for pollution that's cycling through the oceans. So I would just also push everybody to see what citizen science project that they can become involved in. So, and with that, we're going to wrap up, and I'm going to let Jen make some closing remarks and lead us to some resources.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks, Emily, and thanks, Dan. It was such a pleasure to have you all together today, sharing some of these amazing resources you've created, and all the hard work that's been done to support our sailing community, and then just our communities in general around water environments, from the youth. I think you did a really nice job, Elizabeth, saying it all: youth, to the individual, to the organization. You'll see on this slide, we've got links to all of those 4 resources and our email addresses. This is also going to be saved on the Starboard portal, so you can watch it later on the US Sailing website. And then resources will be also located on the US Sailing website. So just a big thank you to everyone out there supporting these projects and programs, to Dan, Elizabeth, and Emily for their time today. And just reach out and connect with us. Clearly, we're all very excited to continue doing this work moving forward, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.